I'm Rodney Eric Lopez, and I stand for generosity, faith, and service. I'm on a mission to help people create a healthier relationship with their money by placing giving at the center of their financial lives. Welcome to The Generosity Solution, a show where I'll examine some of the barriers to abundant living and how to overcome them. I'm your host, Rodney Eric Lopez. There are a few things that I read every day. One of them is a blog post by author Madison Taylor of the Daily Ohm. She writes with a clarity and sincerity that I really admire. One of her posts is entitled, "Permission to be Real." Have you ever said that about yourself or someone else? I'm just being real. Well, what does it mean to actually be real? Here's what Madison has to say. People who keep it real don't present a false self in order to appear more perfect, more powerful, or more independent. People who keep it real present themselves as they truly are, the good parts and the parts most of us would rather hide, sharing their full selves with the people who are lucky enough to know them. In the first episode of this series, I talked about the power of masks, how a mask can have the short-term benefit of delaying pain or discomfort. However, holding on to a mask for too long can cause serious harm if we never deal with what's troubling us. It can keep us from being real with ourselves and others. The first step to removing a mask is acknowledging you even have one. Sounds simple, right? But that sense of personal honesty can sometimes be the most difficult aspect of healing. What's the next step? I believe that it's sharing and talking about what's troubling you with people who can help. People who have your best interest at heart and can support you in being your best self. Now, doing that requires some vulnerability and openness on your part, and that takes some personal courage. One of my favorite quotes in this area actually doesn't come from psychology, spirituality, or personal transformation work. It actually comes from one of the great legal figures of the 20th century, Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. Brandeis was highly committed to the idea of transparency in business. At the turn of the century, the term used was publicity. Not in the public relations sense that we use it today, but in the sense of making information widely available for the public interest. In a letter to his fiancée in 1893, Brandeis wrote, "If the broad light of day could be let in upon men's actions, it would purify them as the sun disinfects." That idea morphed over time to a better known quote in 1913 where he said, "Sunshine is the best of disinfectants." Now, while a strong aerosol or hand sanitizer makes a good disinfectant, nothing really makes a space feel clean like sunshine and a fresh breeze. More than its sanitizing effect, sunlight brings a sense of joy, hope, and possibility to a situation. In fact, when we have less sunlight in our lives, science has proven that our moods are negatively affected. As sunlight diminishes during the winter months, many experience seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, appropriately enough. But that's literal sunlight. What about shining a light on the aspects of your life that are causing you pain? Are you able to open the figurative drapes on that situation and get some support? When it comes to finances, for instance, many people are living with a silent shame that is causing them emotional pain. DeForest Soaries, who I mentioned in the first episode, is the author of D-Free, Breaking the Chains of Financial Slavery, and a pastor in New Jersey. He talks about the financial burdens people carry with the insight of someone who's in tune with their struggles. He says, "When I'm paying last month's bills with next month's check, that's slavery. When I'm writing a check hoping it doesn't bounce or pull out my credit card hoping it doesn't get rejected, then I'm living in financial bondage." What troubles him most, however, isn't the financial problems people are facing, but their unwillingness to ask for support. "It is one of my deep frustrations," he says, "that I can't figure out how to convince people that it is honorable, it is noble, it is cool to go for help." I intimately know what it's like to live with that kind of burden, keeping up appearances so that we don't have to admit that we're struggling, as if others couldn't identify or empathize. Sometimes this money behavior comes from our money experiences as children. I have one vivid memory of an argument that took place between my dad and our landlord when I was 8 years old. They had a dispute over the lack of heat we were receiving in our apartment. I remember us having to place electric space heaters around the apartment because it was getting colder, and heat wasn't coming through the pipes. When the landlord came to our apartment one day, he and my dad had an intense argument over this, and the landlord said that for an additional $200, we'd get the heat turned back on. My father refused on principle, and it ended with my dad throwing the landlord out of our place. The landlord got the last laugh, though, because a few days later, I remember coming home from school and seeing an eviction notice on our door from the marshal's office. We had to leave our home and spent the next year staying with a relative until we eventually found a new place to live. As I look back on that experience decades later, I can appreciate how much is packed into it. Maybe the landlord had a legitimate reason to raise the rent. I have no idea how much oil prices were going up back then. I know that my dad was trying to make ends meet and felt that he was being taken advantage of. All I knew then was that $200 was the difference between us staying in a home and neighborhood I loved and sleeping in someone else's living room for a year. I also know that that experience hurt my dad deeply because he never talked about it with me. I didn't make a conscious decision to keep money problems to myself, but that's not how it works. You absorb certain behaviors and thought patterns based on the models you see growing up. And that was one that registered subconsciously. Don't talk about money problems. It wasn't until many years later that I finally got the personal courage to begin to break this pattern. What was the difference for me? When I casually mentioned that I was having tax trouble to a friend who was an accountant, she gently inquired about what it was. I reluctantly told her that I had made some poor decisions in the past and that my wages were being garnished. I couldn't believe that the words were coming out of my mouth because I was extremely embarrassed that this was happening to me. When she heard the details of my situation, she immediately offered her services to help me negotiate a fairer deal with the IRS, and her intervention brought me incredible relief. She said that it was too bad I hadn't mentioned anything sooner because she could have done something about it earlier. I told her that I was ashamed of my situation and couldn't bring myself to talk about it. Her response was simple and yet profound. I see this all the time. Lots of people are going through this, and many are in even worse situations than you. Hit me like a ton of bricks. Lots of people are going through this? People in even worse situations? Well, that makes sense logically, but when you're in the middle of your own storm, it's hard to imagine others in storms of their own as well. That experience was the beginning of my journey to financial health, and it started with the willingness to let some sunlight in on an area that needed a little disinfecting, and someone who was able to hear my problem and respond judgment-free and with love. If there's a part of your life that could benefit from the sunshine of a listening ear and some help, I invite you to meditate on these ideas, especially if you're struggling with your finances. And let me be clear about something. Financial insecurity is an equal opportunity offender. Members of every racial and ethnic group in this country are affected by it, but people of color are particularly vulnerable. According to data released by the Federal Reserve in September 2017, despite gains in income and wealth, the economic gap between Black and Hispanic families and their white counterparts widened between 2013 and 2016, even when it comes to Americans with comparable levels of education. The median net worth of white families is still nearly 10 times the size of Black families. Nearly 1 in 5 Black families have zero or negative net worth, twice the rate of white families, and many are suffering in silence. Letting the sun into this area of our financial life isn't just a psychological exercise of luxury, it's a matter of survival. If you're worried about people's reactions to your plight, I remind you of some old wisdom that brings a smile to my face every time I hear it. The people who matter don't mind, and the people who mind don't matter. Surround yourself with people who are on the journey of financial empowerment and will support you on yours. Do you know what's incredibly powerful about taking this step? You're not only helping yourself, you're serving others. I love the final line of Madison's blog post. Our reward for taking such a risk is that as we do, we will attract and inspire others, giving them the permission to be real too. Imagine the encouragement, which actually means putting courage into someone, that you can provide when you allow yourself to be helped. For me, the central principle of financial peace is generosity. Developing a giving practice is essential to breaking through our money barriers, but that's not an easy thing to do. I'll be addressing that in the next episode. In the meantime, if you'd like to learn more about my work in this area, please visit my website, rodneyericlopez.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic of sunshine and so I invite you to engage in the conversation. I'm Rodney Eric Lopez. Thank you for joining me on The Generosity Solution.